Back in 1955, my grandfather, this handsome man, was a Marine from Maine stationed down in Quantico, Virginia. And every weekend, he would hitchhike from Virginia to Maine just to see my grandmother. A 560-mile journey. Now, I don't know about you guys. I complain walking to get the mail every day. And my grandfather did this on a weekly basis. It took him 16 hours and multiple different carloads, but that didn't stop him from coming here, spending one day with my meme, turning around on Sunday, and heading right back down to Virginia. Now, my grandfather was afraid he would get caught, because if he did, he might get thrown out of the Marines because it was forbidden. But he continued to do this. For 16 months, he'd come and see my meme, until one day, she decided, hey, why don't I make life a little bit easier on you? We'll move down to Virginia, you don't have to hitchhike as often, and start a family. And that's exactly what she did. I was 12 years old when I first heard this story, and it fascinated me. The car conversations he must have had, the people he must have met, it was so cool. I felt something when he was telling me that story. I felt pride. Like, hey, yeah, look at what my grandfather did. Pretty cool guy. And stories are supposed to make you feel something. An emotion. A physical reaction. Chills. Fear. Tears. In the case of my grandfather's story, pride. Stories are where we get our values. That's how we learned. Since the beginning of our civilizations, our ancestors told stories to one another, and we progressed as a society. And at this point in my life, it's that communication of storytelling with one another that very much fascinates me, and what I'm here to talk about today. Do not tell people how to live their lives. Just tell them stories, and they will figure out how those stories apply to them. Randy Posh, the last lecture. Randy Posh is a hero of mine. He was a professor at Carnegie Mellon University. And every year, the university held a lecture series called The Last Lecture. Now, hypothetically, the idea behind the presentation was, if a professor had one final talk to give before he or she died, what would they spend their time talking about? Well, unfortunately, a few months before Professor Posh gave his talk, he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and was given months to live. So this, in fact, was his last lecture. And while he was up there, standing at the podium, talking to his students, he wasn't telling them how to live their lives. He was sharing stories from his life and letting them interpret it on their own. My favorite story of his was after he got established a little bit, he bought a brand new sports convertible. Beautiful, absolutely loved the car. Every month, he would go pick up his little niece and nephew from his sister. And this time, with his new car, he pulled up, and his sister's walking out, holding her kids' hands. She says, now, don't forget, be careful in Uncle Randy's new car. You don't want to get it dirty. And the kids are cracking up because over her shoulder, he opens a can of soda, and he's pouring it all over the car. He goes, what are you doing? He said, it's just a thing. The car is just a thing. And he's glad he did that because later that weekend when he was bringing the kids home, his 8-year-old nephew wasn't feeling well and got sick in the back seat of the car. And the lesson from that story was we put a lot of value on a lot of material things, but no matter how good those things make us feel, it wasn't any better than the way he felt knowing that his 8-year-old nephew didn't feel guilty just because he had the flu. Now, hearing that story makes me want to be a better person. The fact that just hearing those words have that kind of impact on someone. I never met Professor Posh, never spoke with me, but still, that story had an impact on me. And as I look out to all of you here today, I remember, just like it was yesterday, walking the halls of Biddeford. It's changed quite a bit since I was here, but I remember those days very well. Some of the best days of my life were in this building. I remember talking with friends and teachers in between classes. It was fantastic. I also remember at this age, it's very easy to stereotype people. And we did it, all of us did it. We did it just because sometimes what someone wore or the way they did their hair. Oh, look at them. He's a goth. She's a nerd. He's a jock. Yeah, that's what we do. We stereotype people. But you all know the old cliche, don't judge a book by its cover. And as corny as that may sound, it's absolutely true. You don't know if you have something in common with someone without talking to them. What if you had the same favorite movie or the same book What if both of you like Justin Bieber? Looking at you, sir. You don't know until you talk with them. I sat down with someone who you all know very well, and they told me a story that I bet you guys didn't hear too much.
I went to a small high school in Maine where in the winter basketball was king, and played JV my freshman and sophomore year, and really had my heart set on making the varsity squad my junior year. I ended up getting cut from the varsity team, and I was pretty broken up about it. I felt humiliated. However, the YMCA in my area was starting a swim team, and it ended up being something that I was good at. And even though I was already a junior, I made states that year and the following year. So it was something that I discovered because something else that I wanted to do didn't work out. So, but it was a big deal to me at the time.
So not many of us sit and have long conversations with our principals, but we all can connect with people that we might think we might not have anything in common with. Many of the speakers we've heard today have talked to us about failure and failing and how that maybe leads to another opportunity. That's exactly what Principal Wolf told about. Now, this is Irv. Irv is a very good friend of mine. Him and we met where I currently live in Newburyport, Massachusetts. And we were at a town function, and we're hovering over the chips and hummus plate.
It was like the brownies plate. We were here about brownies.
And we started talking, and our conversation escalated. And he started telling me how he's a sailor, and he sailed all across the world. So much so that one night of talking with him wasn't long enough. So we said, hey, let's get coffee the next day. And we scheduled that, and we went there, and we went to sit down and have coffee. And we're sharing stories back and forth, him doing most of the talking. I mean, this is a guy who's had lunch in a volcanic crater 100 feet from a hole that's spewing out lava and gas. He was part of an archaeological team that uncovered the largest T-Rex in the world. He was sailing in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean during an electrical storm with lightning hitting everywhere and lived to tell about it. I'm sitting there and it hits me. Wait a minute. Is Irv the most interesting man in the world? Really, the stories he was telling, it was that kind of power. And so we're sitting there, and he's telling, like I said, telling story after story. And I take out my cell phone, and I say, Irv, is it okay if I record one of these stories? Because I'd like to share this for this talk. And he said, no problem. And went on to talk about his adventures in Antarctica. Of course, he had adventures in Antarctica. And his fascination with penguins, and how he was with a bunch of people, and one of the guys on the boat that wanted to do an experiment and see if the penguins would follow. And I recorded the audio for this conversation, and I'm going to play that.
One of the guys on the boat, he dressed himself one day in a tuxedo. So he looked just like these penguins did. And he was standing there, and he had a group of penguins around surrounding him because they were curious. And they thought he was a papa penguin, a big one. And he stood there, and he was apparently, I don't know, he was too far away to hear if he was saying anything to them. But when he turned and walked away, the penguins all followed him. It was the most unbelievable thing to see. The penguins thinking that he was one of them, and they followed him. It was just unbelievable.
You can't help but laugh hearing that story because you hear his genuine, vivid memory of that particular moment. And again, hearing him tell these stories, I've never been to these places, but I feel like I have. I feel like I've traveled with him in all these adventures. And just through connecting with him that way, through storytelling, made me feel like I understand the world better. And this talk today, it's not just about storytelling. It's about connecting with people, stepping outside your comfort zone and talking with one another. We all sit there, and we sometimes at doctor's office or in awkward situations, we're with someone and we feel uncomfortable talking to them. And I'm urging you to step outside your comfort zone and do that. I talked with Irv on my cell phone. This thing a lot of you guys have, hopefully minus the cracked screen. but you guys all have this and have that power. So I urge you to get out there and talk with people. And when you do, I want you to remember 3 things. 1, introduce yourself. You guys are all young, adorable high schoolers. Adults love talking to ambitious high schoolers. I can guarantee you that. Say who you are and where you're from. Carry yourself with pride. They will talk to you. Secondly, ask open-ended questions. Something we all maybe can relate with. What was your favorite childhood memory? Or did you have any holiday traditions when you were growing up? Try to get that story out of them. Talk with them. And lastly, listen. It's by far, it says it's only one word, but it's probably the hardest thing to do, is when you're talking with someone, listen to what they're saying. Don't necessarily be thinking about what's going on later that night, but listen to them, and that's how stories unfold. And you can connect with people. Irv and I, we connected completely by chance. And our friendship has blossomed because of that, and we've become very, very good friends. So I challenge you, a very specific challenge, to get out there. How awesome would it be if a group of you took it upon yourselves to start like a Biddeford story podcast, and you tried to each interview 10 people in the community and find out about the history of Biddeford and gather stories? You guys can literally shape the future of Biddeford, a community that we all love, by connecting it to the past and the people there. The talent is in this room to do that. And I know you can go out there and do that. Because you never know. You just might meet a man who hitched like 16 hours just to see the woman that he loved. Thank you so much.